Good afternoon. This is June 20th, 2019, and this is Demography Unplugged. I'm Neil Howe, head of Hedgeye's demography sector, and I'm delighted to have this afternoon JT Taylor, who's our Hedgeye's chief political strategist and head of macro policy. Thank you for coming on. And
it's a pleasure. We've been trying to do this a while.
So we have been trying to do this a while.
It's going to be a good one.
Ever since well, and that brings us to the subject of what we're going to talk about, which is the 2020 election, a sneak preview of what lies ahead. It is one day before the official beginning of summer. It is one day before the summer solstice, and this is a good time really to look ahead. I think a lot of people realize that this is an election with high stakes. The Democratic Party is moving left. The Republican Party, I don't know if they're moving right, but they're moving kind of more populist and Trumpier, you know. And there's really three choices after this coming election. Either we're going to go way to the left, we're going to go way into Trump zone, or we're just going to be stuck in lots of noise signifying nothing, which is to say gridlock. So it's one of those
last 2 years. I mean, that's
exactly
that's continuation of the last 2 or 4
well,
years.
we did have the big tax cut. So
we
did have some substantial policy changes. But I think everyone is, as we're going to get to and explain in just a second, there's a new energy in this election which we haven't seen any time in the last several decades when it comes to the new presidential election. So without more ado, let's slip it on. Let me get my we're gonna cover a whole bunch of stuff. We're going to look at how early it is. What do we know about what do we know from the 2018 midterms? A little bit look at that. What matters to voters? Early signs of great expectations. Getting into that whole thing, and then we're going to go through. I think it's like half the Democratic leadership is running for president.
It's unbelievable. 23 candidates right now, and maybe a few more that are thinking of announcing. So
well, there's 23. There's the 24th. Which is Stacey Abrams, which is still a maybe, and we kind of included her a little bit. And there's a 25th out there. I just realized this morning, and I talked about him a few weeks ago. That's Mike Gravel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Really?
The former senator of Alaska. Yeah. He has not served in Congress since before Buttigieg was born.
Wow.
I mean, think about that. He is 89 years old.
Yeah.
Talk about an age. Anyway, we're going to get into all that and finally look at the Senate
race. Good contrast to Biden.
Yeah, makes Biden look like a young guy, you know. So maybe this is just all positioning. You know?
Yes.
Okay.
Biden's plan.
Yeah. All right. Well, how early is it? And how early is it? How early is it in the cycle? We got a great chart here, basically looking back to where this would have been in 2016, and maybe you can. Talk a little bit about this chart here.
Like 3 days ago, actually, in 2015, actually almost 4 years to the date, Trump declared. And he was nowhere on anybody's radar screen at that time. Neil, you know that as well as I do. And when he jumped onto the scene, came down that escalator at Trump Tower on June 16th, no one gave him a chance, snowball's chance in hell. At that time, if I'm not mistaken, Jeb Bush was the front runner. Marco Rubio was polling second. And you had Scott Walker also. Scott Walker was in the mix too.
Everyone thought Scott Walker was this smooth-talking, kind of educated. He was going to be a force.
And Trump gets in there, again, almost 4 years, a little over 4 years ago to the day, and he's polling at 4 or 5% at the time. So it's very, very early days right now.
And even for a while, Trump was rising. And then it was Ben Carson for a while. Do you remember?
Yeah, Ben Carson.
And then it was Rubio again, kind of, you know, he had to come back. And
Santorum had a little blip there, just a brief blip.
But I guess here's our point. Whatever we say in this broadcast, it is really early, and I think people have to remember that. And we're going to get into a little bit the poll numbers and the futures markets and all that, but that's really kind of what?
And we do, again, just one point, that while there are 23 candidates, Democratic candidates, back in 2015 and 2016, there were 15 or 16 Republicans. We kind of forget that fact that there were that many early on. There were a lot of them, but this is one of the biggest fields I've seen in my lifetime.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. Okay, and What do we know about the 2018 midterms? And that just gets, we did actually report on that. I think that came out in November, December last year. And here are a couple important points that I just want to make. One is that whatever you may think of Donald Trump, he is, I'll tell you one of the, he's made engagement great again. Yeah. I mean, Americans are really into voting again. The overall voter participation rate in the midterms last year in 2018 was the highest according to the U.S. Election Project, and they measure percentage of eligible voters, was the highest since since 1914, since the beginning of World War I, over a century. It's also the highest one-year rise in voter participation since our nation was founded. This is really remarkable. And leading that increase, by the way, and by the way, there are many ways to measure this. I think we have another thing here actually looking at remarkably, this chart shows in yellow here are marked counties in which the participation in 2018 was greater than in the presidential election of 2016.
That's saying a lot. I mean, look at some of those states too. You've got Texas, the Dakotas. I mean, this is Texas had some of that was a close race, but that was the highest turnout ever between O'Rourke and
you also had
Cruz.
a few in Georgia.
In Georgia,
that was very close
the
there.
Stacey Abrams race.
Exactly. So this is amazing. Now, leading the rise is the youth midterm turnout. Here, it's measured by either by Circle or by census. Either is all those underage. I think one of them is under age 25, the other is under age 30. But you can see we have in this chart actually the final census numbers, which are just released last month. And you can just see this is an incredible jump. Probably if this were done the way the U.S. Election Project does as share of all eligible voters, it's probably higher as well as any time since several decades. It was very high in the late 60s when early wave boomers were highly engaged at the time. Remember with the Vietnam War and all the protest movement and so on.
But traditionally, it's not a segment of the population that votes much.
No.
So they're discounted.
And it's still lower than older people, but it was the largest single jump. And the other thing, this is the hard news for the Republican Party.
Very grim.
Is that these millennials are voting hugely for Democratic candidates. And as you can see in this chart, by 2-to-1 margin, they voted for the Democratic candidate. That was substantially higher than in the 2008 Obama election, right? So this is would you say this is a challenge for the GOP?
Huge challenge for the GOP.
This is it, because they're voting more and they're voting hugely.
And again,
for the
you do have a segment of the Republican Party that's older, whiter, and male that's dying off. So
that's also generational replacement. And you can see here, this basically looks at the midterm turnout boost by the percentage increase. And as you can see, the increase by younger people over where they were in the last election, the last midterm election, was the largest of any demographic group. So again, that suggests that the youth may be a factor. And this simply shows shifting demographics. So when you combine the higher voter participation rate, plus the fact that they're voting 2-to-1 for Democrats, plus the fact that every year you get 4 million more people entering that generational group, right? And because we know, and we actually did, I think about 6 weeks ago, we actually did a show on how political affiliation is formed by your coming of age moment, and it tends to stay with you as you grow older. So you get more of those people coming in. And of course, you also see in this particular chart, this is where you show the minority share is also rising. One of the reasons why they're voting more for the Democrats is a larger share of them are non-white, Hispanic or non-white. And
you also saw
also
saw another stat in there, another a group whose participation increased. That was somewhat surprising when we talked about this late last week. Asian Americans.
Oh, Asian Americans. Yeah, we did cover that, and that was an interesting. Back in when Bob Dole ran against Bill Clinton, and that was back in 1996. We forget how recently that was. Asians voted more for the Republican Party than the Democrats. Asians actually, until the late 90s, were basically a Republican-leaning group. They are now more likely to vote Democratic than Hispanics. So it's actually very interesting. And Asians now are the largest growing immigrant community, right? They're overtaking Hispanics in terms of their growth. So that is actually something also to keep into the mix as we look forward.
Again, ominous signs for the Republicans still.
Well, another one, yeah. And so, well, this was...
Yes. Just
so here's the question.
Little comic relief here.
Exactly. Well, the GOP could try to raise the voting age to age 65, right? Or they could hope that this is a replay of 1972, when McGovern ran against Nixon for this, Nixon's second term. Boomers just barely made even or slightly voted in favor of McGovern over Nixon. Every age group over age 35 voted overwhelmingly for Nixon and gave Nixon a tidal wave victory, right? So if you're GOP, you're saying, we need another 1972 again.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
All right.
Make 72 great again.
Yeah, make 72 great again. Exactly. Silent majority. Just a couple little notes on what happened, by the way, and this is really looking at the House election. What we basically saw was in the House districts, the purely rural didn't change hands at all. The purely urban hardly changed hands. Even the mostly urban, mostly suburban, it was basically in the mixed suburban areas where the Democrats really won. It was kind of in those purple zones. But also that speaks to the polarization of America, right? And no one's changing anyone's minds at your extreme urban and rural ends in America today. And just kind of in the same theme going on to the Senate, what happened, the GOP nets 2 in the Senate, but they won big in the rural states.
Yep.
Where did the Democrats pick up 2? Well, they picked it up in Nevada and Arizona, which, although I know this sounds counterintuitive to many viewers, Nevada and Arizona are considered urban states, very urban states. Why? Because if you don't live in Las Vegas and Arizona, you don't live in those states. It's basically remote. Just desert. Anyway, so that's kind of what happened, and that's kind of your story there. All right. So what matters to voters in 2020? Well, still mainstream stuff. The economy doesn't matter quite as much, and joblessness doesn't matter quite as much because the economy is doing well. The economy is running flat out. We're above capacity. We're running above potential, to put it in the CBO language. But you still see mainstream issues. It's terrorism, it's healthcare, it's still the economy. And although I will point out that we are also more polarized than ever. And if you look back at previous times, there's a great analysis done recently by Pew. You can see that if you look at Republicans versus Democrats, you can see that the major issues weren't all that different between Republicans and Democrats, but it becomes gradually more polarized over time. And now you see, yeah, sure, there's still issues that matter both. They tend to be those mainstream issues. It's healthcare, it's the economy, it's employment, a little bit on the drug use and a few of those things. But you see on some of those issues, they're way off to the side. I mean, if you're really concerned about immigration, you're red zone. If you're really concerned about the environment, you're blue zone. And your views aren't shared at all by the other side. No. So this is the other new reality of this election, the significance of which we may have some occasion to get to. Early signs of great expectations.
Yeah, the enthusiasm.
The enthusiasm. And we even saw that in the 2018 elections. The one poll came out and said that something like 60% of voters said this is the most important election of their life. Maybe they need to get a life.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of hard to believe. But I think there's a real sense that the nation's coming to a crossroads. This polarization kind of gives you the sense that we either go all one way or all another. People don't want to stay stuck in the mainstream now. Yeah. And one thing you see here in this is that you can see that where we are, a 10 percentage point rise in the percentage of people who are enthusiastic over where we were in 2016. A lot of people thought 2016 was a pretty big deal. Well, we're way above that, and we're going to see
Already.
that line track even higher. So a lot of expectations going into this.
Huge. It's going to be big, and you were talking about polarization. It's also reflected in Congress. You know, the Congress is divided as well, and the pragmatists or the centrists are non-existent in both parties. So
right, you don't want to be a pragmatist.
You don't want to be a pragmatist.
If you're
right
a pragmatist, you're basically saying, I'm irrelevant.
Yeah. It doesn't work anymore.
Yeah,
Before, the pragmatists used to make everything happen.
This is always my thesis about why Trump won. What was the final figure? 12, 13, 14% of Bernie Sanders voters voted for Trump
over.
Because they wanted a wrecking ball. They just, I don't care what it is, just give me something new. Okay.
Meet the candidates.
Meet the candidates. Well, let's talk a little bit first about the Republicans. Anyone up for challenging Trump? After the Mueller report came out, that kind of put a damper on it, didn't it?
Nobody really is rising to the occasion. You have Bill Weld, of course, who announced months ago, and former governor of Massachusetts, a libertarian, it doesn't seem to be gaining any steam. Again, with Trump's popularity in the Republican Party in high 80s, low 90s. Anyone is fighting an uphill battle, especially someone like Weld from the Northeast.
And Bill Weld, talk about the ultimate anti-populist, right? He's Harvard, Oxford, Massachusetts. I mean, the guy is like, he comes from a blue blood, Brahmin family in Boston, and his motto says it all: America can do better. Oh my gosh, the Trump is going to have a field day with that one. We're the deplorables, man. Anyway, but he doesn't have a chance.
He doesn't stand a chance whatsoever.
No, he doesn't stand a chance. So that's kind of where definitely where the Republican Party is not going, right?
It's not going in that direction.
But that gets a little bit into, we had the Maryland governor for a while.
Yeah, Larry Hogan was considering it, but he announced that he wasn't going to run a few weeks ago. So that brings us to Kasich, the former governor of Ohio. He's now a political contributor on television. He's making the rounds. As I understand it, Neil, he's waiting in the sidelines. It doesn't look as if he'll get in, but if Trump does trip up here in the next couple of months for whatever reason, Kasich might be waiting in the wings. And a lot of people are talking to him and asking him to stay in the sidelines, saying that right now all he'll do is spoil a second Trump term, and maybe that's what he wants to do at the end of the day. But right now I don't see him getting in, but see him waiting on the sidelines for something significant to happen to Trump, if anything happens at all.
Kasich, by the way, used to be a fixture here for a long time on the Budget Committee. And
that's when I was on the Hill.
And the guy's a rocker.
Yeah, he is. He loves his music. I
remember when I actually testified a couple times for his committee, and I came up there and he said, Neil Howe, he said, among demographers, you're kind of like Pink Floyd or something really ridiculous like that.
We were in the leadership meeting,
Yeah, it was just kind of weird.
We were in a leadership meeting, and he was presenting the budget when Gingrich was speaker, and he goes, this budget is better, this budget is better, it's better than Ezra. And just dead silence in the room, because everyone else, there were a bunch of us in our 20s and everyone else is in their 40s and 50s. No one who knew, probably our viewers today don't know who Better Than Ezra was or is, but a great little band back in the 90s. But he would throw out these things all the time. My
point is that all the metaphors, all the analogies for him are band metaphors.
Yes.
Anyway, it's just anyway, fascinating guy. He brought
smart as a whip.
Very smart. Real number cruncher. That really didn't come out in 2016 when he tried to do this kind of more touchy-feely, kind of warm side. But he has an edge to him. Very interesting. I have to say, though, that the opportunity, here's my feeling, that something might happen at any time, right, regarding Trump. Whether something happens in New York State, they try to indict him, or who knows what might happen, right? And he's just sitting there.
That's exactly right.
Ready for the opportunity. All right.
And this next one, we thought we'd slide in there. Justin Amash, a congressman from Michigan, Republican congressman.
I know nothing about this guy. So
yeah,
please.
he is a former, he just resigned from the Tea Party on Capitol Hill, which they call the Freedom Caucus. And he's been an agitator since his first days in Congress. And he is the only Republican out there to in the House to support impeachment of President Trump right now. So worth mentioning that he is going to be out there, sort of a fly in the ointment right now. Should he announce, he will go after the Libertarian vote. Trump will try to squash him like a bug, and that's what he intends to do. I think that was a tweet he may have sent out last week, but just worth noting because you may hear a little bit more about him. But again, with Trump being in the high 80s and low 90s of support in the Republican Party, Amash is going nowhere.
It gets me into we're going to move to the Democrats. Yeah. But before moving on, it's worth raising the whole idea of a third party spoiler. Every election, that's always a possibility, particularly in a close race. You remember Ross Perot, who arguably threw the election to Clinton. I mean, there is a lot of talk now about the former CEO of Starbucks.
Yep.
What's his name?
Howard Schultz.
Howard Schultz. One of the reasons why he is on the top of the hate list of the Democrats, because everyone thinks if he runs, that's the one way Trump can win.
Absolutely.
Right? Could he do that? I mean, will he do that? Does he realize what that might do?
I think that's why we haven't. This was all the buzz at the turn of the year, back in January, and we haven't heard a peep from him since. So he made that big splashy announcement back in January or February, and you would think he'd be mobilizing in these past 6 months, but not a single word, at least as far as I can see, and I watch this stuff every day, not a single word.
That's basically why Bloomberg dropped that, why a lot of these people.
Bloomberg saw the numbers. He has a very, he's got an incredible polling team. The pollsters went out there and said, look, what does the landscape look like?
They officially declared there was no interest.
They back and think about this.
I know.
Think about this.
But anyway, someone made a lot of money.
But Bloomberg's pollsters said, and strategists said, you will guarantee a second term for Trump if you win.
All right. We now go on and say how to think about all these Democrats. Now, I have a little chart here, kind of a key, because there's so many of them. How do you think about them? So I divided them up in this chart into both ideological schools and generation. Yeah. The first school is, I should say, just party, you might say, or ideology is kind of old school Clintonian. We used to have Terry McAuliffe, who would have fit into that. He dropped out, or he finally didn't declare. Yep. We just basically have Joe Biden. I mean, if you want a moderate, if you want kind of your old school, true, tried, tested, kind of. The only other person who'd fall into that is obviously Hillary Clinton. Yep. And by the way, she's still not bad on futures markets. She's getting like 3 or 4 cents on futures markets. People still think she's going to come in. But basically, that's it. There's only one person who stands for your kind of old, moderate, technocratic center. That's Joe. Okay, my second group, and there are 4 members I kind of roughly put in there, is your kind of progressives on the economic left. And obviously, starting with Bernie Sanders, Democratic Socialist, Elizabeth Warren, definitely there. Amy Klobuchar, who I actually think migrated there too, to her very strong stand on antitrust and kind of economic justice issues. She's an expert on antitrust. She's writing a book on it. She thinks the laws need to be changed anyway, way out there. And Tim Ryan, who's kind of a weak representative of what I call your blue collar economic left. I think a better representative of that school would have been Sherrod Brown, who's definitely got that gravelly blue collar kind of thing. But Tim Ryan is kind of a nicer, touchier, feelier. I mean, he's kind of into meditation and yoga.
Meditation, all of that. Yes.
Are you disappointed that Sherrod Brown didn't?
I think Tim Ryan is a more attractive candidate. You said it right. Brown is not made for TV, if you will. Sorry, no offense.
Well, I don't know. What's out is in again. What's out?
Yeah, but he's just he's, as you said, he's kind of frumpy. gravelly, and
I think that's the new cool, though.
Yeah.
I think that's back. I don't know. I think what goes around comes around.
Contrast to Trump.
Yeah, really. I mean, that would be good. Okay, and then you got 7 of what I call progressives on the cultural left. You got Bill de Blasio, Julian Castro, Kirsten Gillibrand, Cory Booker, Kamala Harris, Jay Inslee, Michael Bennet, who may actually be a progressive moderate. Okay, so he could be in there or not. But each of them has their issue. Yeah. You know, it's race, it's gender, it's climate,
gun control.
Gun control. With Cory Booker, it's judicial reform. Yep. We actually did a piece on that earlier this year on kind of the politics of criminal reform and why that's changing. We think there are very important reasons demographically why that's actually changing now. But interestingly, these are dominated by Gen Xers, and guess what? They're not going anywhere in the polls. Yep. So this is a problem. Gen X was late to Gen X has been late all their life. And late to get involved with politics, late to make themselves felt in politics, late to even run for office. Yep. And they're still not showing up. We're going to get to that in just a second. Finally, we got a third school, progressive moderates, or what you might call purple pragmatists. John Hickenlooper from Colorado, Steve Bullock from Montana, and John Delaney, who's the only kind of businessman running. Is that right?
Former private equity guy from Maryland, really, really smart.
He's the only guy who says it's okay to have billionaires in America, or one of the few. But anyway, and they're not going anywhere in the polls, are they?
No. Okay. And in fact, I don't think the last 2 made it to the debate table next week.
Steve Bullock did not, and John Delaney.
Oh, Delaney did.
Delaney did.
Bullock did not.
But Bullock did not. Then we got another group, which I just call your attitude candidates. Yeah. They have no identifiable policy positions, but they just stand for, I don't know, kind of an attitude, right? And this would be Eric Swalwell and Beto O'Rourke, who just, he's the ultimate Xer candidate. Just little kind of bits and pieces of YouTube stuff about his life and kind of unscripted moments, just like this show, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Just unplugged. And then you've got Marianne Williamson. We meet her in just a second. Yes. She's a New Age candidate. And then you've got what I call your young, brainy progressives. Tulsi Gabbard, Seth Moulton, who did not make the debates.
It was, yes.
Andrew Yang, Stacey Abrams, and Pete Buttigieg. By the way, of those 5, 4 of them are Ivy League. Yeah. Seth Moulton's Harvard, Andrew Yang is Brown, Stacey Abrams is Yale Law. And Pete Buttigieg is Harvard again. And they're very smart, they're very wonky, and they're a lot of them. I know Tulsi Gabbard is a huge Bernie-act. She's big. These are kind of the kids of Bernie, right? Anyway, so you got that group, and you can see, and we're going to get to their popularity in just a second. This is the latest polling averages, right?
Yep.
And maybe you can kind of describe what's going on.
Yeah, just Biden came out of the gate hot, took a bit of a hit over the last couple of weeks, but surprisingly, Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have crisscrossed. So Warren has gained at Sanders' expense, and then you have Pete Buttigieg coming in there almost out of nowhere in 4th.
Right.
So it's been a really interesting couple of weeks. And again, as we just touched on, the debate is coming up next week, the first debate, 2 days, where Elizabeth Warren will be center stage with others on day 1, and then you'll have Biden and Buttigieg side by side with who's next to Biden.
I think you've got Biden and Bernie Sanders
and
Buttigieg
next to each other,
all on the same
stage
so
on day 2.
Does that help Elizabeth Warren to have no close competitors?
I think it does. I think it does.
It helps or hurts?
I think it helps.
It helps her because then she shines.
Yeah. And the only way it doesn't help is if
no one tunes in,
and everyone tunes in tonight too.
Right.
But you think that again with her surging in the last couple of weeks in the polls, getting a lot more attention. In fact, it's taken Trump and team have taken notice. They kind of wrote her off early on, and they wrote off. I think he said we thought we got rid of Pocahontas. And now he's ramping up his attacks all over again. So she's gaining some steam. So maybe, just maybe, she comes out. Maybe she gets a good viewership on the first night, and that continues to help her numbers.
I think Warren is a very serious contender. Yeah, I think Buttigieg is I'll be honest with you, just my own intuition, Buttigieg is not going to keep rising, and I think Biden is going to come down. I think you're going to see Warren. She is all policy. Yeah. She's all prescription. She just comes fully equipped, and she has the kind of hard-edged stuff that people want to hear. Yeah. I mean, her hero is Teddy Roosevelt, trust buster. I mean, she is what people want to hear right now. And she's a real deal, I mean, in terms of policy change. Okay, you see here, this is the Iowa Democratic Caucus, but I just want to make one point. Bernie and Joe Biden are both silent generation. They're not even boomers. Yeah. They remember World War II as kids. Elizabeth Warren's the boomer. Pete Buttigieg is a millennial. Where are the Xers?
No Xers
there
again.
There are no Xers
Next
on
slide.
there. Okay. Here we go. And then we see, this is some, sample head-to-heads, right?
Sample head-to-heads, a lot of news this week. And, of course, Trump a little upset at Fox polling and his internal polling, so he fired his pollster.
I saw that.
As a result. But some surprising numbers. I think at least 3 or 4 of the candidates who were beating Trump in Iowa and a number of other states. So it's
kill the messenger.
Kill the messenger.
And yeah, wow, yeah. This doesn't look good for Trump. No. We're going to get to this in a second, though, because before we sign off, I just want to ask the question about what I think is really important: is the interaction between the election and the economy, right? So we got to have a few thoughts on that near the end. Okay, finally, I'm going to end with the futures market. Now, this is not really, this is predicted, which limits the size of the bets. This isn't serious money, but at least it's money, right? And here you see, interestingly, again, who is at the top? Biden, Warren, Sanders, Buttigieg. And then you get an interesting Andrew Yang is this super wonk kind of economic populist is actually right under in terms of betting. Maybe just all the Andrew Yang people love to bet. I can easily imagine they're all on the web, loving to bet. And then you've got Kamala Harris, Cory Booker,
and got Hillary Clinton on there, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, Hillary, I told you, she's at 3 cents, right? And then you've got. But anyway, so you got all the Xers further down and all of your kind of progressive left people going on there. All right, let's just say a few words about each of these. So this is going to be like, what's that show where you just have like 10 seconds to say anything that comes to your mind? Like a free association.
Lightning round.
Yeah, lightning round.
Lightning round.
We're going to do our lightning round. Okay.
We'll do this every week.
So I can imagine. You're probably good at this. Okay, Bernie Sanders. Well, there's so much to say about him. What do you want to say?
I see him falling, as I said earlier. Right. I don't see him winning the nomination ultimately, and it's really interesting watching just the dynamics in the last. Again, remember, just to preface it one more time, this is early days, and we pointed it out at the beginning of our show here. But it's surprising that Elizabeth Warren has gained at his expense over the past couple of weeks. He doesn't really have, in my opinion, he really doesn't have much of a message. It's the same message as 2016, and I think Democrats need someone that's really going to excite the base and unite the party.
Yeah, and I think the two things are happening. I think the energy level's flagging a little bit, and more importantly, the contrast between himself and the other candidates is no longer there. I mean, Elizabeth Warren has got all the goods.
All bunch around him.
She's got all the goods, whether you were talking about antitrust or tax, wealth taxes or single payer, or just going down the list. She's got all the goods. She actually makes Bernie Sanders sound kind of uninformed, literally, in terms of and what do millennials follow? So where does Bernie Sanders get all of his attraction? Millennials. Yeah. What are the millennials on the left really? They're super wonks. You just know they're super wonks. They know all the facts and figures. And Elizabeth Warren's delivering them now, and Bernie Sanders, I don't think, is to the same extent.
And just one final note. He does associate with the socialist moniker, if you will, and the Trump folks are going to want to try to peg all the Democrats with that moniker, and it just. I think at the end of the day, a lot of Democrats may stay away from Bernie because of the win factor.
And interestingly, can he beat Trump? Elizabeth Warren has been very clever. She says, I'm in favor of markets. Elizabeth Warren has never declared, she says, I want an America in which markets work. in which markets represent justice. I'm not opposed to market economy. And I think that's a very deft, framing for her campaign. All right. Joe Biden, what do you want to say about Joe?
You know, odds-on favorite right now, in my opinion, but he's got a long, long haul to go, and we're already seeing him under attack by all wings of the party right now. So he is gaffe prone. We've seen a few of those this week already in the past 2 weeks.
He gave up on the Hyde Amendment. You see
gave up on the Hyde Amendment.
So what's that going to do to? Yeah, I just think that was something that, you remember big tent Democrats used to do? Yeah, if you don't like abortion, we can still welcome you in.
Yep.
You're no longer welcome in the Democratic Party, are you?
No. And so I think he was, he did not handle it as well as he probably should have or could have. And you think about this, he's been waiting in the wings for 5 or 6 months. You know that this issue is going to come up. So to me, I'm a little concerning that he was unprepared for that and other things that have been coming his way. But one final note here is that the reason I think Biden has legs all the way through this is that there are Democrats that think he's the guy that can beat Trump, and so they're looking at this candidacy as you're going to have this battle between liberals and the progressive left, who want to be as pure as they possibly can, and then some of the realists and the centrists in the party, we just want to beat Trump.
But I think the other thing, though, if you're a pragmatist and you're kind of in the middle, you're not one of the, not a radical, you're all going for Joe Biden.
Yep.
But if you have any kind of radical position, your vote is being split among all these other groups.
And they'll
once they start winnowing out, I think that's another thing about Joe. His relative numbers will go down relative to that. Elizabeth Warren, we basically already talked about her. Pocahontas.
Sorry.
Well, that's not going to go. Who knows? That'll be interesting, though. If they ever debate, we'll see.
You know he's going to bring it up.
All right. Jay Inslee, my gosh, Green New Deal.
Green New Deal.
He still is governor of Washington while he runs, right? Yep. So he's a little bit like he has to go back to Washington every time.
He gets to go back to Washington, and there's crisis, or just to function. You just can't be an AWOL governor. A governor is it's an executive of a rather large state, so. That's a big challenge for him. So
he's Green New Deal. He's everything is framed around this idea of sort of this total mobilization of America around this idea of sort of pursuing this climate change agenda. I think interesting, along with AOC, kind of framing economic equality or economic justice issues around the Green New Deal theme, when we do this Green New Deal, at the same time, we will have all kinds of subsidies that will right economic wrongs and so on. Kind of an interesting idea. You pose a crisis, and then you use that crisis as an excuse to do a lot of other things.
But as we point out here, he's got to get more than just the Green Deal.
I agree with you. I agree with that's the problem with going that direction. That's why I put him in the kind of the values progressives. John Hickenlooper. He's your pragmatist, right?
Yep.
Kind of in the middle.
Governor, executive, popular governor of Colorado.
He's the kind of guy who argues, just like Joe Biden, I can get things done.
Yep.
I can work with the other side. Exactly what people don't want to hear right now, right?
I think he got off to a rather rough start. Was a little erratic in some of his responses, but again. If they are looking for a pragmatic governor, a pragmatic executive, they may look at Hickenlooper. I just don't see him grabbing that appeal from the party itself.
I don't either.
You can take this one.
Okay, well, this is your California candidate because, JT, you and I know that all you need is love.
Yes.
And all we all need is healing.
Is love.
Healing.
Cue the music.
Okay. So she is a California candidate. She represents Beverly Hills, Hollywood, Venice, Santa Monica, and Topanga Canyon. Well, anyway, that's what she did for many years. Yep. She was a congressional rep. So you can imagine, we didn't get Oprah, but we did get Marianne Williamson. And I think the country needs that message. If whether or not they want a president embodying that message, though, was another kind. Anyway, she's a boomer, and she is the most prototypical boomer of kind of saying all those boomer things, right? Healing. Healing America. All right, let's move on.
All you need is love.
Amy Klobuchar, she has a reputation in Washington for being a real badass as an employer.
She does, right? Yes.
What happened with that?
Just some being a little stern with her assistants at times, shall we say?
Really?
More than a little stern. I've seen it all up there, but she is a tough cookie. But I'm surprised that she hasn't done better.
I am too, because she is Minnesota nice, right?
Minnesota
she is a little bit. She has a radical edge in some of her economic proposals, but she comes across as this extremely decent, non-radical persona. I thought that would have. Well, we'll see.
Yeah,
I mean,
we'll see.
the debate's coming up.
And I think she's in the second day, if I'm not mistaken. And look for her to maybe stand out.
One more in the second.
One more in the second day. I think. But look for her to stand out. I think she's a good, experienced debater, given her years in the Senate. So look for her to make a move in the next couple of weeks.
By the way, she's her experience is in law. And she represented MCI against AT&T. She really, when I talk about antitrust, she is your if you want someone who actually knows antitrust, she's your candidate. Okay, Bill de Blasio. So anyway, there's all these blogs.
30 seconds on this one.
There were all these YouTube videos coming out of New York where New Yorkers are saying, "Take our mayor. I mean, please take him, please." You know that whole shtick. This guy is, he came in late into the race.
Bad, I mean, he's not very well liked in New York City right now, and he's an ultra-liberal, progressive, and the fact that he was the 22nd person to announce, I was stunned. It makes no sense to me.
Right.
So I don't see him getting any traction whatsoever. He'll be one of the first to drop out.
His kind of signature is that, "I know Donald Trump. I know how to take him on." You know, kind of that New York pugnacity. Well, anyway, let's move on. John Delaney, again, the only businessman really in the race, right? So that's his background with hedge
in the private equity space. I believe he ran his own business for years. I've had some dealings with him on Capitol Hill. Very, very smart, knows the issues, knows the infrastructure, in particular infrastructure issues well. So, just somebody like this gains steam. He doesn't have he's not a current member of Congress, doesn't have much support out there. He's going to have to use a debate stage to maybe get some attention.
How in the world is a private equity guy going to win a Democratic primary?
Private equity
be like Mitt Romney running
former congressman.
I mean,
but if the Democrats are looking for, again, a pragmatic, centrist businessman, this is your guy.
That's a big if.
That's a big if.
Let's move on here. Kamala Harris. Okay, I put her in the kind of the values left. She has not done as well as many people expected.
I think she has some better days ahead of her, but right now her performance has been lackluster.
Now, one big problem which also faces Joe Biden is their history on criminal justice, right? Because she was district attorney, California. Biden had the problem that he was the one who sponsored all the legislation. You remember during the Clinton era, all of those 3 strikes you're out stuff, all of those stuff.
Welfare reform days.
Yeah. What's I mean, in my opinion, what she's missing is a mainstream middle class agenda, right?
I couldn't agree more. What does she identify with?
Well, yeah, you think about her sort of kind of grievance issues.
And she hasn't been in Congress but 2 years, so not unlike Obama over a decade ago. But there is nothing that she's championed that I can remember.
And on things like anti-Trump, for instance, she hardly even knows the issue. I mean, that came out, and she's like, "Oh, well, whatever, Elizabeth Warren."
But I do think her better days are ahead.
Well, maybe we'll see. Michael Bennet. Now he knows Hickenlooper, right? I mean, the two of them
worked arm in arm for years. Another private equity guy, if I'm not mistaken, turned senator, And
he's really smart, isn't he?
Yeah, this is when it comes to, I know you have him in the progressive cultural left. You might have an issue there or two, but he really is and has operated as a centrist in the Senate. And I know a lot of folks have looked to him for leadership when everything collapses. When the left and the right aren't talking, and McConnell and Pelosi aren't talking, they look to Bennett and a few others in the House and the Senate
shouldn't these guys, a lot of these guys, be actually? Well, we'll get to that.
We'll get to that. I
know
where you're
going
with that.
Shouldn't they be running for Senate? Okay,
we'll get to that.
That's their big problem.
He's not.
Right?
He can keep his seat and run at the same time.
Got
so he
it.
doesn't have to give it up.
Well, speaking of which, Steve Bullock, he did not make the
debate stage.
Did not make the debates. He's a little bit like Joe Manchin, right? He's sort of your real rural red zone Democrat, right? He's guns and hunting and farming and
all the things.
Just pickup truck and beer and country western, and so that means he doesn't have a prayer, right?
He doesn't have a prayer in the Democratic
Okay, let's
Party
move
right
on.
I'd like to think so, but again, it's the governor of Montana. He is one of the guys that should consider taking on the Republican in 2020 in that state. So we'll get to that in a second.
Kirsten Gillibrand. Well, I mean, she used to be a kind of a moderate, and she's really gone. I think, she's gone really to the left, particularly on gender issues. I think running as a woman for president on gender issues, I think, is really marginalizing. That's all I can say.
No, I agree.
And she has not registered at all in the polling. All right. Cory Booker, again, what I consider kind of a marginal issue. He used to be, again, a moderate, used to be in the middle. I used to thought he would be a great candidate for the Democrats. But he goes up on these, what I would call kind of fringe issues, like criminal justice.
And early on in his career there, he has identified, as you said, with those centrist issues, those issues that would bring both parties together. And he has completely, it seemed as if he's completely dismissed those in the past 5 or 6 months and taken on these things. Again, the thought here is to appeal to the progressive left to help propel you forward. I don't know that works.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta appeal to more mainstream. Beto O'Rourke, I call him an attitude candidate, but again, he should be running in Texas, and that's the problem. But anyway,
enough said there.
Yeah, enough said there. Tim Ryan, we already talked about him. He's sort of your, he's the closest thing you have to a kind of your blue collar left.
Blue collar, exactly right.
But he's not
Ohio.
A lot, Ohio.
Steel country.
Yeah. Stacey Abrams.
Not declared, but
really, really interesting candidate. She is, she's fiery. She's eloquent. She's smart.
Yep.
And that combination of fire and I mean, frankly, Pete Buttigieg should get her kind of fire, in my opinion. He needs it.
But once again, as we mentioned earlier, and I don't know if this is a good segue to talk about that, but there is a big push by Chuck Schumer for her to run against the current sitting senator in Georgia for 2020. So
I want you to talk a little bit about that, because we're coming up on that at the end, because that's what they really need. They need to take the Senate.
Right.
Otherwise, the White House isn't going to do them any good. Andrew Yang, he's your huge wonk candidate. He's your guy who believes in algorithms more than policy, right?
Yep.
Build an algorithm, I think his signature policy is the universal benefit, right?
Yeah.
The demo grant, as we used to call it in the 1970s. And he gets, I think, what's interesting about the demographics, he gets all the millennial gamers, mainly male. He gets a lot of young guys because he believes you can solve all of America's problems by just inventing the right kind of app.
That's why he's doing well in the futures markets.
Yeah, that's right. That's why he's doing well in the futures. I think we forget that out. Julian Castro, mayor of San Antonio. Right? And very much
and former Secretary of Housing as well.
Under Obama.
Yeah, under Obama.
Very much he's kind of a racial justice candidate, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and again, had a number of good years in the Obama administration. His brother serves in Congress. I thought he'd have a little bit more footing coming out of the gate, but he has done absolutely nothing in 6 months. So
but again, the absence of a mainstream kind of agenda. Wayne Messam, I thought a fascinating guy. He's mayor of Miramar, Florida, which is a kind of a bedroom community from Miami. He's a Jamaican American. He's an entrepreneur. He's kind of self-made guy. Really amazing story. Absolutely hasn't registered at all.
No, not a thing. I mean, I hear nothing about him. He did not make the debate stage.
Or no, he did not. He did not. So he just okay.
So if you don't do that, then you're just gonna. If you don't make that debate stage,
Seth Moulton, another guy, didn't make the debate stage. I will say one thing about Seth Moulton. He's again, he's one I call your young brainiacs. He's interesting. He went into the Marines. He served, I think, 2 terms in the Middle East and Afghanistan, and he majored in physics at Harvard, I think. The guy is super smart, and he's probably the most conservative candidate in all 23.
Yeah,
he actually believes he sees nothing wrong with billionaires in America. He thinks illegal immigration actually is a problem that we should solve. Well, that alone just makes him a complete heretic, right? Anyway, you go down these issues, right? It's too bad maybe the Democratic Party doesn't have a couple of more candidates like him.
Like him and Bullock as well. I mean, Bullock is out there, and as well as Delaney and Bennett.
Seth Moulton, by the way, is almost a millennial. I mean, he's pretty young. He's around, what, age 40 or something. Okay, moving down, Tulsi Gabbard is actually 1 year just missing the millennial cutoff. I think she was born in 1981. She's from Hawaii. Her favorite sport is surfing.
Yeah.
Well, you know, some older politicians do golf. She does surfing.
She does surfing.
She is a Hindu by choice, incidentally, and not by family.
By choice.
By choice, and she's a big follower of Narendra Modi, and that's gotten her into all kinds of problems because does that mean, what's her attitude toward the Muslims? But she's a huge opponent of Trump on his Middle East policy. What do you think? Any thoughts about it?
One quick thought. I don't know what her main issue is. And I followed
well, that's a problem.
Yeah, so big problem. I mean, she has no platform. I have not seen much from her with regard to a platform. Some of these other candidates that we've gone through, you see, like, we talked about Warren, we talked about Biden to an extent, even Bernie and others. They've got something that they identify with.
Right.
And even the folks that, we talked about Jay Inslee, the governor of Washington State, it's the Green New Deal. At least he's got the Green New Deal. I don't know what Tulsi stands for.
I don't either. Eric Swalwell, again, I call him an attitude candidate. He took Pete Stark's district in the Bay Area. So he's another California candidate. Again, I have no idea what he stands for, but he's very progressive. He's like Tulsi Gabbard. I think he likes Bernie. He doesn't mind the label of socialist, I suppose, if he had to have it. But again, absolutely doesn't register at all. And finally, Pete Buttigieg, the youngest of all the candidates, 40 years younger than Joe Biden, and he absolutely is registering. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, he really has surprised a lot of people with his performance in the last 3 or 4 months. He's came out of the gate hot. He's very, very good on the issues. He's an attractive candidate. He's a great debater. So we've seen him in some forums over the past 2 or 3 months. He's going to have a big showing here again during the debates in 10 days. But I look for him to look to him to stand out here in this crowd, and maybe give Biden a run for his money. But that contrast that we talked about earlier, Buttigieg, Biden, and Sanders, there's going to be, as you just said, a 4-decade difference between him and Biden. So I really do think he is one of the brightest candidates I've seen in decades.
He's very smart. He's an accomplished musician. He knows postmodern literature. I mean, he can give you his opinion on great novels of the 1920s.
How many languages? Does he speak 3 or 4 languages?
I think he speaks several languages. He actually tried out a pretty good French on a French ambassador who's visiting. He's very much involved in the issues of South Bend, Indiana. Apparently the voters there like him. And he's openly homosexual. And that is an interesting kind of signature element, kind of accentuating the kind of generational divide, you might say, in terms of attitudes. I would say his take on kind of mainstream economic and healthcare policy issues and all that is sort of unexceptional. I mean, it's hard to know really. It's hard to define that. His attitude on foreign policy, I would just say, is kind of warmed over Obama.
Yeah.
You know, you made a big foreign policy address recently, and it's just sort of, you know, we believe in the UN, we believe in all our multilateral commitments, and we're not going to get our, you know, it's kind of like
everything this current president is not.
Exactly. Yeah, very politically correct, you might say as well. Okay, don't want to get behind here, but this is going to be here the Democratic primary debating round 1. And here you can see Elizabeth Warren is going to be there against really no one near her in the polls. Is that right? I'm looking at that first list.
No one, not that I can see.
Exactly. So you expect her to
maybe Booker's the closest.
Yeah. Well, certainly the one with
or
the more
Klobuchar too. But Klobuchar is going to be
in that one. So that'll be the interesting thing to watch.
Yep, that dynamic.
I think to me, right,
yep.
is going to be Warren and Klobuchar. See which one of them shines, because in a way they're vying for the same space.
Same space.
Yeah, I agree. But the big one is going to be the next night.
Oh yeah.
That's going to be what everyone wants to see, and that's going to be interesting. Biden against Sanders, right?
Biden against Sanders with Buttigieg and others, Kamala Harris.
Right.
You're going to see Kirsten Gillibrand kind of trying to step out as well. So that night too is going to be an interesting.
Yeah, some of these people are going to have to fold soon. Finally, let's talk about the Senate race. And I just to frame this before you give your comments. A lot of people have said, what is the point of the Democrats winning the White House if they don't stand a prayer in the Senate?
Yeah.
The Senate, even if they do the nuclear option, if the GOP still has a majority in the Senate, they can basically stop anything that the Democrats favor.
2 words, Mitch McConnell.
So what's the game plan here? Now, obviously, if the economy turns south and everything turns south for some reason for the GOP, then it's a whole new ball game. But don't the Democrats have to have a plan to take back the Senate?
They do have to. I mean, they're obviously focused on the House as well.
Right.
But to take back the Senate, they are going to be fighting. There are 34 seats up this year. The Republicans have to defend 22 of those 34 seats.
So that should give them an edge.
It should give the Democrats an edge because the Republicans have more turf to defend. But the Republicans are defending some pretty safe turf for the most part. So some of these seats, of these 22, I think 10 of them, 10 are safe.
Let's start with, we talk about Beto O'Rourke. He should be running in Texas
Beto
against John Cornyn, right?
John Cornyn. Bullock should be running in Montana for the Senate in Montana. You should have, as we said, Stacey Abrams running in Georgia.
Absolutely.
And in Colorado, I think you should have a race there in Colorado too, with Hickenlooper taking on Cory Gardner, Cory Gardner, who is one of 2 vulnerable Republicans.
So this is so messed up. This is so messed up. Instead of running for the presidency, these people should be running for these offices to take back the Senate.
Yeah, and so they're not. And so when you talked about strategy a second ago, again, a lot of focus is keeping the House. But you think, and I know Schumer has been making a lot of calls to these guys, trying to convince them not to pursue the presidency and to pursue these seats. He's been unsuccessful at every turn. Now, he's recruited some other candidates countrywide, but these are seats that there are 2 vulnerable seats here that he failed at recruiting good candidates for.
That's amazing.
He still has a little bit more time, but he's losing ground with each and every passing day.
Well, we'll close with these 2 slides. This is just the futures market for party Senate control. It's actually, the odds are actually gaining a little bit for the Republicans, particularly when you go, the backwash of the midterms, everyone thinks didn't look very good for the Republicans. You can see them rebounding very slightly.
Yep.
It is still considered a 70% probability in futures markets that the GOP will continue to have control of the Senate. And as you see, although it's diminished slightly, you can see that it's still overwhelmingly about 70% odds that the Democrats will continue to keep control of the House. I guess no real surprise there, right?
No. And again, a lot could happen between now and election day, 2020. But right now, the House is in good shape for the Democrats.
So the last big question, and I know we're running late, so we're just going to chop it off here. But I think the question is, and I've been on the record on this, but is the impact to the economy. Keep in mind that we have a president who I believe has never had a 50% approval rating in his presidency, even the first few weeks of his presidency, and most of the time he's been south of 45, right? Yep. So we've never had that before, I don't think.
No, we've not had that. And so, then talk about the economic numbers now. Yeah.
Well, the economic numbers is super, absolutely superb.
Across the board.
But now if that turns south, everything to me goes on the economy. So if you're an investor, this creates a very complex interactive kind of recursive problem here, because on the one hand you're looking at your investments, how they're going to be primarily affected by the economy, but in addition to that, the whole political correlation of forces will shift. So a lot to me depends on how soon the next recession happens. Yeah. I've been on record talking about the yield curve inversion. And that could that could result in a recession anytime between December, January, all the way to October, if you just go by the historical track record on that. Well, if it happens in October, that means we could already have the election. People don't even know we're in a session yet, right? So that would be great for the GOP.
Yep.
But the worst thing for the GOP would be an earlier
one
entry, and that might change everything. It may even happen in time to change the selection of the nominee.
I agree, and right now we have seen the Republican Party unified behind President Trump almost from day one.
Well, they have no other choice.
No other choice, but in the Senate, even after watching the Senate over the past couple of months now, given tariffs, given Saudi Arabia, and we're dealing with Iran today, they've backed him on everything. You're just starting to see some splintering, not much, not that significant yet, but you're starting to see some splintering. You're going to see a big vote on Saudi Arabia and arms deals to Saudi Arabia here in the coming days. If the economy goes south, do more people jump ship, and is it every man for himself?
That's one thing, the economy going south. The other is kind of all the legal minefields that Trump is in.
Dozens.
Kind of all of that.
Feels like dozens.
JT, there's so much we could talk about. We're going to do this again.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think this is fun, and this is the gift that keeps on giving in terms of entertainment, among other things.
Let's hope that this field has winnowed down so we don't have to spend as much time covering 23 guys.
It's so complicated to talk about. Okay, well, that's it. Demography Unplugged. It's been a pleasure to be here again, and we're going to follow up soon.